Hey everyone, Pastor George here with our Bible study recap for today. And today in Bible study, we looked at Judges 10. Now, last week in Judges, we looked at the story of Abimelech. And Abimelech is not a judge, he's an oppressor of Israel, but he's one of their own. And he's killed ironically. And at the end of that, then we get told about two other judges, and that's kind of what starts us off this week. And you'll notice that this week's chapter, a lot shorter than the ones we've done in the past, but a lot of really interesting stuff is packed in there, so we don't want to miss it. So after Abimelech dies, we're told about two judges, Jair and Tola. Tola and Jair, right? Tola's first, and he rules for quite a while, and then he dies, and Jair falls after him. And we don't really know much about them other than where they're from and who their dads were. We know that Jair is very rich, right? He has 30 sons with 30 donkeys and lots of gold and 30 cities and stuff like that, right? So, and that's just a Hebrew way of saying he was a billionaire, right? It's a metaphorical type of showing of that, right? So anyway, he's those are those two guys, right? And we don't know anything about them. What we do know is that their times are prosperous. They both rule for a good amount of time, and they both seem to have been marked by peace and prosperity. Once Jair dies, the people of Israel do something bad, but it shouldn't surprise us what they do. They go and they worship other gods. Now, here's the interesting thing. If you look at this passage, and if you look at the verse 6 in this, you'll see that it mentions two gods that we've seen before. Lots of times, if you've been paying attention to the names of the gods that it's mentioning, it mentions Baal and Asherah. So worship the Baals and the Asherah. And all that means is that those are the two Canaanite gods that were very worshipped by the Israelites. They appear in a lot of different things. I talked in a theologue one time about how we found, I had a professor at seminary who did this. This is one of his major things. His book was Does God Have a Wife? And it was an example of how the ancient Israelites would associate the God of the Bible with Asherah, who was a fertility deity in the Canaanite religion, as a wife. And we found temples to this. So none of this should surprise us, right? We're told about this in the Bible. The prophets rail against it. The guys in Judges rail against it, right? The guy who's writing this isn't denying that it exists. He's saying that this is bad, right? So it shouldn't surprise us that they did this. But anyway, they serve the Baals and the Asherah. And they also serve the gods of Syria, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, and the gods of the Ammonites and the gods of the Philistines. And you'll see that their list of deities who they're worshiping is expanded, and these are all the people that surround Israel, right? So they're starting to grab gods from these different things and worship them. Now, the Lord doesn't like this, and so to serve justice on them, he hands them into the hands of their enemies. And so these groups that were oppressing them end up on the outside, end up coming in and attacking them. And you'll see every tribe of Israel is almost engaged in this, right? The southern tribes like Judah and Benjamin, all the way up to the northern tribes like Ephraim, right? So they're all fighting with each other about all this sort of stuff. Now, this just shows how far Israel has fallen, right? That all of Israel together is now being attacked. And so what they do is they take their idols and they throw them aside. And they cry out to the Lord. And this is a pattern we've seen before, but this is the first time we kind of see it laid out in a narrative function. We just kind of had one sentences so far in Judges. And so we have a dialogue between the Lord and the people of Israel. And they say that they sinned against him. And they tell that they've done that because they've sinned by forsaking him and served these other gods. And then the Lord gives them a list. And you'll see that this list of people he saved them from almost mirrors exactly the list of the gods that they're worshiping, right? He says, I've saved you from the Egyptians, from the Amorites, from the Ammonites, and from the Philistines, the Sidonians, the Amalekites, the Moabites, right? All of these people, he saved them from the past. And you see that they end up, instead of turning to the Lord, they end up turning to their oppressors instead, right? Adopting their gods. And, maybe this was because they saw these other kingdoms, they liked what they had, or they wanted to make good, and one of the ways you could do that is by worshiping other people's gods, and so they would do that. And all of this seems to indicate that they just threw God aside, right? And now the people that they were saved from end up becoming their masters. And so they turn to the Lord, and they do repent over them, right? But the interesting thing here is when they do this, and you can see what they say in verse 15, right? They say, we have sinned. Do to us whatever seems good to you. Only please deliver us this day. And when I saw that, I thought that was really interesting, because there you see that the primary goal of them doing this isn't to serve the Lord, right? It's not like, messed up. We shouldn't be serving them. We should be serving you. It's instead, save us, right? It shows a different side of what they want, right? They see this as kind of a more of a transactional thing, right? They don't quite get it. But even though they do this, right, the Lord is going to still try and help them, right? And so the Lord is going to call someone, and we're going to find out who he calls next week, and we'll see how that goes. But that's where we're at, right? We're at a point where Israel, they don't really know what they're doing. So, and that's uncomfortable for us. But I think we also probably see a little bit of that in ourselves, right? Our own unwillingness to serve God in a lot of ways, how we go after other things, and how maybe when we turn to God because we want things, not because we want to serve him. In any case, that's what we talked about today in Bible study. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. I'll see you tomorrow for a new thing. Peace out.